Welcome to the Personal Development Mastery Podcast. I am Agi Keramidas and my mission is to inspire you to rise up, grow, stand out and take action towards the next level of your life. I am interviewing leaders, influencers, entrepreneurs, authors, exceptional people who can and will inspire you to improve your life. Tune in for 2 episodes each week, every Monday and Thursday. In today's show, I am delighted to speak with Sofia Vasiliou. Sofia, your passion is helping people to shift blockages and transform limitations to discover who they truly are, becoming healthier, happier, and filled with purpose. You have studied and practiced many healing modalities, including Reiki, crystal therapy, and you have completed a 3-year shamanic apprenticeship in the Peruvian Amazon with an indigenous shaman. Whilst you were working at the Ayahuasca Foundation, you are a pro-certified Psych-K practitioner and proficient in tools such as the emotion code and body code, which all can help make significant shifts in one's health, well-being, and life. So, Sofia, welcome to Personal Development Mastery Podcast. I'm really excited to be speaking with you today.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. Yeah, thank you for having me on the show.
I'm looking forward to it as well, and I'm delighted to speak with you. Sofia, even from the introduction I've made, one can tell that this is not going to be, a common person talking about common things. So let's start with some elements of your story, or how you turned out to do the changes and pursue the life that you are. So if you can share maybe a key defining moment in your journey.
A key moment. Okay. I suppose I was very lost at one point, and from a young age I was fairly depressed for no real reason. It's just sort of this latent misery that I couldn't seem to shake. And I'd always been into the stranger things in life, and studying things like astral projection as a young teen and things like that. And something happened around my 21st birthday that really pushed me deeper into a depression. And it was that really sent me off into a space of just really wanting to heal and change. I'd always had some kind of gift where if I touched someone, either with massage or just sending energy out, they would feel a lot better. And so that had always been part of my life. But I went to do some voluntary work in the Amazon and then in Mexico, working with species in the rainforest and then counting coral and fish species on the Mexican Barrier Reef. And after that, I went to Guatemala. And this was the turning point where I had a series of crystal therapy sessions with a South African lady. And they were a series of past life regressions and just energy clearing, meeting my inner child. And the first session was 4 hours long, was super intense, lying there in this sort of slightly idyllic jungle type setting by a beautiful lake and surrounded by rocks, and just seeing how wounded this tiny child version of myself was that I'd never really connected to before. And after that session, I had what's known in the trade as a healing crisis. Okay. And so essentially my body just purged everything. For about 24 hours, I was sicker than I'd ever been in my life. Mm-hmm. And then within 24 hours, it literally just completely flipped. And I had the most incredible amount of energy. my eyes were crystal clear and absolutely white. My skin was healthy and radiant, and I was just like a new human. It was the most bizarre experience I've ever had. And so that was in around September of when I was 26, which is about a decade ago. And I came back to England for a few months, and I just knew I had to go back there. And so later that year, I went back and had 3 past life regression sessions with this lady. And that, with those sessions, went back to a negative life to resolve some issues there, and then a positive life to learn some lessons, and a neutral life where you just kind of see what life is like in an equilibrium. And so you're learning very specific things each time. And I was just so fascinated. I had a deep love of crystals anyway by that point, and was working with them in my personal life. But when I went home, I studied crystal therapy for 2 years and started working as a therapist. And I've sort of been on that path ever since, of just sort of working with people and just helping people go deeper. I'm fascinated with roots and finding the root cause of a problem. And in the way my understanding of the world works is there's sort of different densities of energy. So we have the physical level, which is the most dense, it's the one that's manifested reality on this plane of existence. Then you have the emotional energy, which if you're human, you'll know that your emotions affect your physical body quite often. And then you have your thoughts, that realm, which, they affect the emotions, which then affect the physical. And then above that, you have spirit, which is the purest form, or the lightest form of energy that comes into us. And so if we can go back and intercept an issue before it becomes physical, or at a layer that's a higher frequency than the physical, then we can deal with it much quicker. And in the shamanic realm, with the indigenous Shipibo tribe I was with, they describe it as, often Western or allopathic medicine, tries to cut off a tree at base level at the trunk and expect it not to grow back. And yet, they look for the roots and pull it out from the roots and do the extraction there. And it's sort of a much longer term benefit by doing that, because you're actually taking out the problem rather than the symptom. And so that's where the paradigms kind of meet in which I work.
I see. And you actually touched upon already on something I wanted to ask you about, the Western medicine's approach to healing and how it's limited. And you gave a very nice example with the tree being cut like that rather than looking for the roots. Can you tell me, when you had that healing crisis, you said like something was purged. What do you think was purged at that time? Was it emotional? Was it spiritual?
I mean, it was on every level. As I said, I was super sick. Within a few hours of the session, I just didn't quite feel right. And suddenly I got really weak. And then I needed help into my room. And then I was sweating. I was vomiting. Everything from everywhere. And, just almost in that kind of blind delirium. I was so hot and just delirious for, nearly 24 hours. And so I would say there was definitely a spiritual element to it, but it's, again, a frequency thing, just burning off things that no longer serve, transforming or transmuting that energy from one density into another form and just letting it go. So it felt very much like a fire cleansing my being on different levels. And I was probably conscious of some of the material that was coming up sort of from childhood or beyond, from previous incarnations. But most of it was quite unconscious. It was just a physical reaction of what had been done during the session.
It's fascinating. And I've heard similar stories. And it's always that when you go through to the other side and have gotten over that physical discomfort, how much clearer things are. Sophia, you mentioned the term spiritual already a few times, which I was sure that you would. So I want you to tell me, what does this term mean to you? What does spirituality mean? How would you define it or explain it?
So for me, spirituality is really about one's connection with their true essence or with source. And what I mean by that is, again, this sort of, I feel that we're all a spiritual energy that's having a virtual reality experience inside a physical form. So the essence of who we are is a spirit. And yeah, it's one of those terms that's really difficult to define because it's sort of almost self-referential. It's, for me, it's sort of the ultimate term is spirit, but I suppose it's a frequency of energy that, you know, it's a link to everything in the universe. So my worldview is that, you know, the universe itself is consciousness. Mm-hmm. There's a field of energy that has intelligence in and of itself. And the essence of us is part of that intelligence. And it's on that level that we are all one and all connected. And a small part of that, or a small awareness in that, gets funneled into a physical body or a plant or an animal. And it's that's having a unique experience that is Sophia or that is Aggie. And so as we understand that and sort of remove the veils of illusion that we're not that, we can open up to the wonderful knowledge that we have this immense power because we are everything. Mm-hmm. You know, ultimately, you know, not to use a dividing term, but we are God in some sense. And that's sort of the place I want to get everyone to realize, essentially. So when I talk about helping people understand their true nature, it's really understanding their God self. Mm-hmm. Because we are all that. Everything is that, you know, whether it's a table or a mouse.
And it's so sometimes it can be difficult to grasp if you're not aware of things like that. I think your definition is absolutely awesome. You did a very good job to describe something that is probably indescribable. And can I share, because it brought to mind that I found a quote which is one of I really like by Carlos Castaneda, and he talks about that. So he said, I'm just going to read it out as it is. In the universe, there is an immeasurable, indescribable force which shamans call intent. And absolutely everything that exists in the entire cosmos is attached to intent by a connecting link. So it's
yes,
it's very it's something that really needs. When I first read it, I needed to contemplate on it. It makes sense, but it's something that many people might need to really pay some attention to. And so let's talk a little bit about that, shall we? I mean, as you know, many people, maybe the majority, but I won't say the majority, let's say many people are hesitant towards anything that is not physical, towards anything that they can't really, you know, put their hands on, you use the word, the stranger things, that's how you called it earlier. So why do you think that is, and how could someone that gets intrigued by the spirit should take some steps towards realizing it?
Gosh, there's a lot of things going on in my head. We're going with so many directions at the moment. So I suppose a big part of it, and also a big part of what I call spirituality in terms of the journey towards realizing that you are spirit is about shedding beliefs in certain ways, like breaking out of the illusion that we're not. And the problem is there's a collective paradigm. So there are some cultures that are very open and aware of this connection. And so discussing these kind of things and experiencing them and discussing them with people who may have experience isn't difficult. It doesn't cause shame or embarrassment or fear. But there's a lot of people and a lot of cultures that completely shut that kind of idea down. And as we sort of are in, especially in Western culture, as it were, you know, this ultra scientific paradigm, which basically says if we don't know how to measure it yet, it doesn't exist. But you could have said that about germs a few centuries ago because microscopes didn't exist. And yet now we have better instruments to measure it. We now say it's insane that they don't exist. So sort of taking it from that perspective, you know, in my world, you know, we just haven't learned how to measure it yet. But the human organism is, you know, the best scientific instrument there is, and we can tune the frequencies that we want to understand, and we can tune our awareness to discovering these different places. And I think because of a lot of the cultural beliefs and setups, there's so much fear around doing that. So if you say, "Oh, did you know the table is not really solid?" You know, you know, as a lot of quantum physicists would say, you know, from a physical perspective, anything solid is a complete illusion. But some people really struggle even with that. But, you know, when you take the entire human race and condense all of their atoms, all of the particles within their atoms until they become actually next to each other, we would fit into a sugar cube. That's how much we have density. And the rest of it is empty space. Then it's really hard to break out of this illusion because our eyes, visual sense seems to be one of the most pronounced. And you know, I can knock on the table and get a response. So how is it not solid? And so I think it brings up, you know, anything that undermines the foundational beliefs you have about reality will create fear. You know, a good example from people's emotional lives is when they realize their parents aren't perfect. And it can really shake people. It can, you know, because they're just this idolized beacon of perfection, like even though they can be completely messed up, just that sense that they will always have that. And then you realize they're human when you get to a certain age, and the cognitive dissonance that causes. Even though nothing has actually changed, you know, parents were always humans and messing up and making mistakes and doing amazing things in equal measure. But your perception has changed. And that shift in perception causes fear and unrest. And it's like that with every step of the spiritual journey as the veils of illusion are opened and you're like, oh my gosh, that's even more far out than I thought I was. You can often start to question your sanity because it just seems so nuts. And this is where, for me, I love the fact that science and spirituality are now being bridged through quantum physics. You know, there are cultures and texts around and that have been around for thousands of years that are languaging the same concepts that are being revealed now through scientific data. And that's where it becomes a bit more stabilizing. And that's where I think more people are able to make this leap into the spiritual realms than ever before, at least on a more mass level, rather than the elite and the monks and those kind of people, because the basic paradigm of science is also shifting, and so we can accept these concepts much more readily.
Absolutely. And the I like very much what you're saying about you use the word yet, that science can't explain these things yet. And I agree, completely agree. And there is a ton of new research and new proof that comes and shows to people that there is much more, and we're starting to prove it. We're starting to measure it. Of course, there is very much resistance still from the how things are, because of many reasons. There are other things that are maybe benefiting from humans not really going all out there. You mentioned about our reality and our senses, our vision, that really are one of the biggest factors in perceiving our reality. So our beliefs as well. So we talked about the senses. I want you also to tell me how our beliefs can change or can define what we perceive that is real, apart from our senses.
So I was attending a lecture by Dr. Bruce Lipton last year or so, and he was showing a paper from Modern Psychology Journal, which said, we used to think that seeing is believing, but now research is really showing that believing is seeing. And the perception of reality is more important in our experience than what's actually there. Mm-hmm. And, for me, that was just mind-blowing. With the Psych-K work that I do, which is about reprogramming the subconscious beliefs, I understood that, but just hearing it in that way was just, a real wow moment, is like that powerful. And I guess one way of explaining it would be two people having, a similar experience. One's afraid of dogs and one loves dogs. And a barking dog runs up towards them. Now, one goes into a terror response and one goes into a growth and happiness response. Now, there's nothing different there except their perception of what that dog is. And yet they're having a completely different physiological experience. They've gone into fight or flight or into growth and repair. One's heart is completely open. One is shutting down their immune system and getting blood to their limbs to run. And so actually triggering, small DNA changes. Because environment not safe, need to do X, Y, and Z to make me stronger. So, the cognitive functions shift, and so their decision-making will be instinctual rather than creative. And, there's no difference between what's happening and the external perspective. So even though the outside reality can be exactly the same, your perceptions completely changed the event. And again, this is where we realize many people say, oh, you're not the center of the universe. You really are the center of your universe, because your perceptions filter your reality completely. And so, the way I see the world is completely different to anyone else. And no one else will exactly be able to understand the way I perceive this external reality. It's like one person has red glasses on and someone else has blue, someone else has violet. They'll all see roughly the same thing, but from a completely different color range. And then when you change a belief, it's like you change from blue to red. Like, whoa, I never knew the world could look like that or be like that, because it's always been red or always been blue.
And that's the thing with the beliefs that we hold, is that we don't, as you said, the lens, if you wear a red lens, you're used to it. You're not aware that there is a red lens. You just see what's on the other side. You look through the lens. And the challenge with the beliefs, and we will talk about that in a moment when I'm going to ask you about the Psych-K, but I think the challenge is first to realize that there are some beliefs that really change how we perceive our reality. And that example you said with the two guys that and their attitude towards dogs, that's a perfect example, because on the outside, from an objective point of view, the event is it's objective. It's a dog running towards two guys. The subjective experience, our reality of life, really is based on what's going on inside the mind. Um, you mentioned, and I actually wanted to talk about Dr. Bruce Lipton, who you met in person and you had training with him. I discovered, I had known the name, maybe I had seen, some short videos, but it was earlier this year when I got recommended to read the book, The Biology of Belief. I devoured it in, 5 days. And, when people who've read it know that it's not like an easy read that you can just go through it. But I couldn't put it down. I found it fascinating. And then there was what we have already talked about, the realization that the beliefs that I have really hold me back, and I don't really am aware of them. They're there on the background, on the subconscious level. And that led me to do more research on the Psych-K method, especially, that he described. And then somehow led me to find you on the website of Bruce Lipton and have the Psych-K myself. So we'll talk about it in a little while. But can you tell me a little bit more about Dr. Bruce Lipton and the philosophy of epigenetics, for people that may or not be aware? And I think that links nicely to what we were saying earlier about the merging of science and spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dr. Bruce Lipton was one of the first people back in the 70s or maybe late 60s who was studying stem cells. So what he did in his experiments was he put identical stem cells in 3 different culture mediums. So the culture medium would represent the bloodstream. And so you change some pH or other food elements in this medium, and suddenly the cell becomes bone. The other one becomes skin. The other one becomes muscle. But you've got genetically identical cells. And the only thing that's changed is the external environment in which they are sitting. Now, at the time, everyone was looking at the genes control life. Genes create the program, and you are a victim to your genome because your genes tell everything about you. Yeah. But he was seeing in the lab, well, hang on a minute, if I just change what the genes are sitting in, essentially it becomes a completely different cell to its brother, but they're genetically identical. And for many, many years, that was kind of pushed down because the Human Genome Project was, going to be the answer to all medicine. And eventually he left standard academia for a while because he couldn't lecture anymore, teaching something that he was seeing that was observationally absolutely wrong. And fast forward, 25, 30 years, epigenetics is now the hot thing in biology. And what epigenetics is all about is realizing the environmental factors in affecting the way the genome is expressed. So the genes would be seen as the architectural blueprints. So, they code for certain things, but in order to get the blueprints off the shelf and get the architects to actually make, or the builders to make the building, you need someone to come in and pick the different elements off the shelf and actually put it down and say, okay, we're going to make it this way. And the environment informs the cell how it's best to make itself based on what's going on outside. And so on a cellular level, you have the cell membrane, which would represent the skin and the receptive organs, giving the data to the internal part of the cell to say, okay, we've got famine here, so we need to make sure we produce loads of fat so we can store energy when we need it. We've got a lot of danger, so let's make sure our arms and legs are really strong, so it would choose different elements based on the environmental factors. And some of that is, and it's called epigenetics because it's the level of control above the genes. And then Dr. Bruce gets quite far out as well. He's sort of, for him, his story with Psych-K is, he was talking about how changing our perception and our beliefs will change the chemistry inside our body, which will inform the cells to do different things and invoke health instead of deterioration, and create feelings and emotions of love instead of fear. He had no clue how to do it. And so when his lecture audiences would ask, well, yeah, but how do we do this, Bruce? Like, I don't know. And one happy conference, the man who originated Psych-K, Rob Williams, said, hey, Bruce, you might want to stick around for my lecture because I've got the answer to that question. And so Dr. Bruce watched Rob Williams do a presentation on Psych-K, and they've started a long friendship since then. And so what the Psych-K does is changes the beliefs from the inside out. So in our first 7 years of life especially, we are basically programmable sponges. We are designed to take in our environment on levels that we're completely not aware of. Our brainwave states are not fully developed until we're actually into our early teens, but they don't hit alpha state, which would be cognitive reasoning functions, until just around age 7. Everything before that, we're essentially in delta or lower brainwave state, which we associate with sleep and hypnosis. So things are just being written into the subconscious as programs. So every time a parent tells you you're amazing when you do X, or I love you because you've done something, you're creating specific beliefs around I'm not worthy unless I produce. Or if they shout at you in anger and then like 5 minutes later give you all the love in the world when they're really sorry and they've calmed down, you might have conflicting beliefs. So I'm wonderful and I don't deserve anything. And because you don't have a filter at this age, you're just, everything you hear and see you take in as true. And so this is where, as we go through life, these subconscious programs, because they are at the level of, below the level of our conscious mind or our normal cognitive reasoning, catch us out. So we end up in pattern loops. Why does this always happen to me? As soon as you hear yourself saying that, you say, okay, there must be a subconscious program in there somewhere that's creating this experience, because the role of the subconscious mind is to prove itself right. And so if the subconscious has programs like, I can do anything and I'll never succeed at anything, you will take yourself down a certain road and get really close, and then you'll sabotage yourself because it's showing you that you can and that you'll never succeed. And it's really, really difficult to break that, because there's the iceberg model of the subconscious or of the mind. So the conscious part is sort of this 5 to 10% floating on the top, and everything else is below the radar. So the most common example would be, when you're driving, having a chat with someone and you're like, oh, how did I get here? Initially driving felt like the hardest thing in the world, but once it's become a subconscious process, your body will drive the car and your mind will pay attention to certain details on the road and be able to have a conversation, and your body just does it. And that's great because it takes in about 1 million times more data than your conscious mind can. So your conscious mind might be dealing with 40 bytes of data, whereas your subconscious is dealing with 40 million. And so it's much better at processing fast, which is why the instinctual mind just, consciousness goes out the window and you just are acting. But when it's a negative program or a limiting program, it's pulling really hard in the direction we don't want to go. And that's when we feel like we're banging our head against a brick wall trying to make progress and being completely unable to do so.
One of the things, possibly the biggest takeaway I got from reading the biology of belief was that when I realized that I have these subconscious patterns or programs that are running in the subconscious and control my decisions really at the end, and therefore they control the action I take and the life I live. It was the big realizations came when I read, and I really knew exactly the point that he was making, that by trying to change the subconscious beliefs that are in the background on a conscious level with, for example, techniques like affirmations, which I have been doing, I think I told you when we had the session, I've been doing them religiously for, I don't know, a few years, and somehow they won't go in and penetrate and change. So that's when I got very much interested in the Psych-K process. To see really for myself how you can change something in the subconscious directly and quickly. So can you guide us through how Psych-K works then on changing a limiting belief?
So Psych-K is a tool through which we can easily essentially biohack the brain and the system. So we, instead of trying to consciously change the subconscious, there's elements to it. So essentially we are consciously choosing the belief that we want and then installing it directly into the subconscious mind without having to use hypnosis. And that's the part of it which I really love, because one of the main fundamentals of Psych-K is that the power is in the partner. All of the wisdom for you, for Aggie, lies within you. And so you have the space to really say, okay, this is my life now. How do I want it instead? What beliefs might I need about myself and about the world to achieve this goal? And then once you've kind of got an idea of that, then we go ahead and start the installation processes. But the first part of that is asking upstairs, asking your superconscious mind, the part of you that is aware that it's part of this source and spirit energy. Some might call it the higher self. And just say, is it okay for me to change this right now? And we do that because, some things we need in our lives to learn specific lessons from. Or, we're not quite done with it yet, or we're not quite ready to make that change yet. And so with Psych-K, we're really bringing the mind, body, and spirit into alignment. So we're consciously choosing what we want our subconscious to do, and we're asking for guidance from our higher self. And once those three things are in alignment, we've got three horses taking us in the same direction rather than taking us into split universe. And that's really the power of it. And the installation process is super, super quick. And what it does is essentially helps the two hemispheres of the brain wire together and integrate. And this is another thing right now that's sort of at the cutting edge of neuroscience is, when they put people in MRI scans and get them to remember a trauma or a phobia, they see that often the data that jams one hemisphere of the brain, essentially. And the Psych-K process uses different body positions and other techniques to integrate the two hemispheres. There's a lot of crossing the midline, and it allows the data to suddenly discharge and pass between the right and left hemispheres. And so you're no longer thinking with half a brain, you're actually whole brained. And that at the end of every balance process, which is what the Psych-K processes are called, they're balances, you end up in a whole brain state. And we use a basic kinesiology of just muscle testing in order to confirm the process at every step of the way. So the principle of kinesiology is essentially the same as what you would use a lie detector for. There's certain physiological changes that the body does outside of your control that indicate whether you're uttering a truth or a falsehood. And so the muscle testing, your muscles will get stronger. There'll be more electrical current passing through your system in the presence of a truth, and they'll get weak in the presence of a falsehood. And so we can use that in order to see what's happening on the subconscious level, because that we intend, okay, we're talking to the subconscious. Okay, now say, I love myself. No, but I do. I thought I did. Yeah, but on a deeper level, you don't. And I guess this is also really where the distinction between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind is really important, because you're not necessarily aware of those programs, because consciously you think, I've got a really healthy relationship with myself. I look after myself. And then in the quiet spaces, you catch your self-talk. Like, oh, you stupid idiot. Why are you doing that again? You always do that. You always mess up. Is that really loving? And so the trick with figuring out your subconscious beliefs is catching yourself in the act. And Bruce puts it lovely, it's look at the printout of your life to see what beliefs you really have.
It's I personally think that every time you overcome one of your limiting beliefs, and I have personal experience of that, your life changes. You take a different path, make different choices, because something that was guiding you, not necessarily serving you with that guidance, but guiding you, and it's not there anymore. So you do different things, and it's I just remember of times about myself when I had a limiting belief really changing, and it's it's one of those experiences that you always remember. Sophia, about you mentioned the Psych-K, and I want you to also, because there are two other modalities that you mentioned, the emotion code and the body code. Can you explain those as well for me?
Yep. So I find that they work really synergistically with Psych-K. So Psych-K we use for installing the beliefs and programs and perceptions that you would like to have in your subconscious and writing them directly into the without having to bang your head against the wall with affirmations and things like that. And we can also use it for reperceiving old traumatic events or imagined future events. So for example, if you're terrified of public speaking and have an event coming up, you can do a balance to imagine yourself at that event and just let it process until you feel peace and non-attachment and maybe excitement about it rather than this dread. Yeah. So that's fantastic. We're changing our perceptions. What the emotion code does, which I'll look at first, is it removes the level of emotional debris that can kind of build up in the system. So normally we have an emotion and we process it naturally. It passes through and then it's done, and it no longer leaves any chemical residue or energetic residue in the system. But sometimes we have an emotion that's either really massive or we get interrupted in our processing of it. So, we're in the middle of a really good cry and someone comes in the room and just shuts it down for whatever reason. And sometimes the energy residue of that can get trapped as a ball of energy in your system. So if the emotion was anger, for example, then you've got literally a ball of anger just lodged somewhere in your energy field. And it can be the size of like a small satsuma to a cantaloupe. And it's just a distortion in the field, but it's resonating to the frequency of anger. And throughout our lives, that happens multiple times. It's just a natural thing. And so suddenly we've just got all these distortions. And, if anger is one that we trap frequently, then suddenly we've got like a bunch of anger in our system. So we'll be more attuned to feeling anger and also to other people's anger, because we have that vibrating in our system. It's like an instrument, a guitar tuned to C. You pluck the C string, any other C strings in the area will vibrate or resonate. And so suddenly that's why angry people attract other angry people generally, or sad people attract sad people, because you have this frequency vibration that's just like, oh yeah, I resonate with you, and you just beacon towards each other. And so what the emotion code does is it identifies these trapped emotions one by one. And sometimes you need further information, like when it actually happened, or other details of the event. And it sort of puts this file above this parapet. So it's like, okay, well, let's get this anger up here. And then once we've identified everything we need to know about it, we erase the data. So it's like the file, we're going through the filing system, we lifted out this file and say, okay, this is ready to press delete now. And the way it's done is just through magnets. So have you ever accidentally wiped a credit card using a magnet?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so it can be done, because essentially it's electromagnetic data, and to throw up the cards, that's what they use in hotels when they're reprogramming the cards. It's just they use a magnet to erase the data there and to reprogram the key. And so we use that using one of the acupuncture meridians, so the governing meridian, which runs technically from the upper lip up through the head and down the back of the spine on the central axis. And we just, with intention of erasing this trapped emotion and releasing it, we use the electromagnetism to roll down that's point, because that connects to all the energy channels in the body, and just erase the file. And it's a very strange process initially, because again, it's pushing that level of far outness. But when you absolutely understand the concept that everything is energy, that's the fundamental building block of the universe, and so energy will affect anything else, then you realize that the electromagnetic field, or the magnetic field of the magnet, can release an emotion. But even more than that, so with the body code, you start to realize that there can be underlying reasons for structural misalignments in the body. And often those reasons can be trapped emotions, but they could be chakra imbalances or something else. And again, once you find the seed cause of the structural misalignment, and say it is a trapped emotion, you erase the trapped emotion and the body snaps back into place. And so you can do chiropractic adjustments essentially by releasing the energy of trapped emotions. But yeah, the body code gets really, really deep. It can find all different kinds of issues, from things like residual energy in the system from a physical blow, for example, which again is like when you get hit by something, normally your body processes the impact and it disappears, but sometimes there's a residue of that, and the vibration of the blow just stays within your cellular memory until it's released in some way or other. And so you can, it can take you on a little magical mystery tour of, oh yeah, I remember that event. Gosh, I haven't thought about that in like 30 years. And some really interesting places.
It sounds fascinating, and that the description that you gave with the ball, the energy ball of anger, and the vibration, and all these kinds of concepts that certainly make sense to me, and I hope people can realize that, because it is it's very important. And I think and sometimes it's the on a different level emotionally, or we know that it's true, even though our brain can't really find the proof for that. You kind of have a feeling that, yeah, this makes sense at a deeper level.
And another fascinating aspect of the emotion code, body code work is the concept of a heart wall. So it's literally almost a physical fortress we build around our heart. And again, it's a very natural process that often starts quite young when, things are a little bit perceived as scary, or, something happens and we can't deal with the emotions of it. We often start to build this wall around our hearts to protect ourselves from deep emotional feelings, especially painful ones. And over time that can build up to become really big and strong, and the effects of that on our lives are huge, because initially they were there to keep us safe, but eventually they stop us being able to give and receive emotions of any kind, and there's a kind of a sense of numbness or depression, lack of ability to really have, in Spanish it'd be ganas, just this joie de vivre, if you like, just this zest.
Yes.
And just even taking down some of the building blocks of it can be quite profound. Clients of mine really report just being more present and receptive with their family, and just being able to feel and actually enjoy feeling. And it's a really beautiful process, and that's one of my favorite parts of the emotion code work, is just being able to take down these layers of defensiveness and allow people to feel again. And right now, where we are in our evolution as a species, we have to be in our hearts. We have to be able to feel and process energy through that space. And having a whopping great emotional wall there kind of stops that process. And so for me, it's a fundamental place to start with many people. It's actually, let's get this down as much as we can, because for some people, to remove it completely is unsafe because they're still in a volatile environment and they just need a little bit of protection. But just take it down to where it's okay, or completely if that's okay, and just allow energy back into the system through that center.
That's great. This was the first part of the interview with Sofia Vassiliou. Join me on the next episode, number 46, where she talks about shamanism, demystifying ayahuasca, and the shift in human consciousness. Thank you for listening. Please take a moment to subscribe and review Personal Development Mastery on Apple Podcasts, and also share this podcast with someone who you think will benefit from it. If you want to gain access to exclusive content while supporting this podcast, then become my patron. The link is in the show notes, or you can type bit.ly/pdmpad. If you want to know more about what I do and how I can help you, or if you have any questions, join my Facebook group Personal Development Mastery. Again, the link is in the show notes, or you can simply type bit.ly/pdmgroup. And until next time, stand out, don't fit in.